When I was 16, I heard the words that would haunt me for years: "You're the disappointment of the century." My father didn't yell when he said it. He didn't even sound angry. He said it like it was a fact, something carved into stone, something I couldn't argue with. He stood there in his worn-out work shirt, the one with his name stitched in blue thread, looking at me like I was a broken dream. I remember the way his jaw tightened before he turned away, grabbed his car keys and left for his night shift. That moment changed everything. It wasn't the words alone, it was the way he didn't look back. My name's Malik. I grew up in a small house where money was always short, tempers were shorter, and dreams were things you didn't talk about because they only reminded you of what you couldn't have. My dad, Jerome, worked as a delivery driver his whole life. He was the kind of man who believed that hard work was the only road to success. I used to believe that too, until I realized that hard work doesn't mean much when you're working for someone else's dream. I wanted more. But to him that made me arrogant. When I was a kid, I used to watch him come home exhausted, his hands rough, his uniform covered in dust, his eyes tired but still sharp. He'd sit down at the dinner table, open the mail, and shake his head when he saw the bills. Then he'd look at me and say, "You better not end up like me, Malik." But the older I got, the more I understood that he didn't mean it the way I thought. He didn't want me to be better, he wanted me to be safe. He wanted me to stay in the box that he thought life allowed us to live in. The breaking point came when I told him I wasn't going to college. Everyone in my family thought I'd lost my mind. I told him I wanted to start my own business, an online store, something I'd been working on since high school. I'd been selling sneakers, customizing designs, flipping them for a profit. It wasn't much, but it was growing. I could see the potential. My dad just laughed. "You think you're gonna make money off shoes? You can't even keep your room clean." He told me I was throwing my life away. And then came that line, the one that stuck: "You're the disappointment of the century." That night I didn't sleep. I just sat in my room, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words over and over. It hurt, not because it was mean but because it came from him, the man I'd spent my whole life trying to impress. The next morning I packed a bag, grabbed my laptop and left. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I moved into a tiny studio apartment that barely had room for a bed and my desk. I worked odd jobs during the day and built my online store at night. It was hard. There were days I thought about quitting, nights when I ate instant noodles and counted coins just to get by. But every time I wanted to give up, I heard his voice again. The disappointment of the century. That became my fuel. It took years of failure, rejections, and setbacks. But I learned. I grew. My sneaker store turned into a streetwear brand, and then into a lifestyle company. I started hiring people, young creators like me who just needed someone to believe in them. Every time I'd sign a new deal or launch a new product, I'd remember my dad's face that night. Not with anger anymore, but with a strange kind of gratitude. Because without that pain, without that rejection, I wouldn't have pushed so hard. By the time I was 27, I wasn't just making ends meet, I was making millions. The brand I started from a beat-up laptop in that studio apartment had grown into a $50 million empire. We had offices in New York, Lagos, and London. My designs were being worn by celebrities I used to watch on TV. Reporters started calling me the young visionary, the self-made millionaire, and sometimes even the prodigy. But inside, I was still that kid trying to prove himself to the man who called him a disappointment. One afternoon, after a long business meeting, I was sitting in my office overlooking the city when my assistant walked in and said someone was waiting for me downstairs. When she said his name, my heart stopped. I hadn't seen my dad in almost 10 years. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. Should I see him? Should I walk away? I told her to let him up. When he stepped into my office, he looked different. Older. Tired. His hair had turned gray, his hands still rough from years of work. He looked around, taking in the luxury, the glass walls, the framed magazine covers with my face on them. Then his eyes landed on me. "Malik," he said quietly, "you really did it." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hug him. Part of me wanted to ask him if he still thought I was a disappointment. But before I could speak, he looked down and said something that broke me more than his old words ever did. "I deliver packages for your company now." For a second I thought I misheard him. But I didn't. He had taken a job as a contract driver, not knowing the company he worked for was mine. My mind went blank. All those years I'd been trying to prove him wrong, and now he was standing there in my building working under my name. The room was silent. I could see the shame in his eyes, the regret, the years of unspoken words hanging between us. My chest felt heavy like I was 16 again, hearing him call me a disappointment. But now things were different. I wasn't that kid anymore. I was the man who had built an empire from the very pain he gave me. And just as I opened my mouth to finally tell him everything I'd held inside for years, to ask him why, to tell him how much it hurt, he said something that stopped me cold. "Before you say anything, son," he said, his voice trembling, "there's something you don't know." And that's when everything I thought I understood about my father, and my past, started to unravel. To be continued. I stared at my father, frozen, the hum of the air conditioner suddenly sounding louder than ever. The man standing in front of me wasn't the same one I remembered from my teenage years. He looked smaller somehow, not in size but in spirit. His eyes, those sharp, commanding eyes that once looked down on me with disappointment, were softer now, almost afraid. I didn't know what to say. 10 years of silence, anger, and distance hung heavy between us, and now he wanted to tell me something I didn't know? I leaned back in my chair trying to steady my voice. "What do you mean?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He took a deep breath, looked around my office again and gave a faint, almost sad smile. "You've done well for yourself, Malik. Better than I ever imagined." He said it like he meant it, but there was something underneath, something he wasn't saying. He rubbed his hands together the way he used to when he was nervous. "I didn't come here to ask for anything," he continued softly. "I came because I needed to tell you the truth." The truth. That word hit me like a brick. For years I thought I knew everything there was to know about my father. He was strict, stubborn, and proud, too proud to ever say he was wrong. What truth could he possibly have hidden from me now? My chest tightened as he finally looked me in the eyes. "When I called you a disappointment," he said slowly, "it wasn't because I didn't believe in you. It was because I was scared of what would happen if you failed." I frowned, confused. "Scared of what?" He hesitated. "Of you ending up like me." His voice cracked a little. "I wanted more for you, but I didn't know how to say it. So instead, I pushed you away." I wanted to believe him, but the wound was still there. "You didn't just push me away, Dad. You crushed me. You made me feel like I wasn't worth anything." He looked down, guilt flickering across his face. "I know," he whispered. "And that's why I'm here. Because there's more to what happened than you realize. The things I said back then, they weren't just about you. They were about me." Something about his tone made my stomach tighten. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an old photograph, faded, folded at the edges. He placed it on my desk. It was a picture of a young man standing in front of a delivery truck, smiling proudly. It took me a second to recognize him. It was my father years before I was born. "That was my first business," he said quietly. "Jerome's Express." I blinked, surprised. "You had a business?" He nodded. "Yeah, a small one. I started it when I was 23. I had 3 trucks, a small team, and big dreams. I wanted to build something that would last, something my family could be proud of." He paused, eyes distant. "But it didn't last. I trusted the wrong people. One of my partners took off with the money and the business collapsed. I lost everything, my savings, my home, my confidence. After that, I swore I'd never take a risk again. I started working deliveries for someone else, just trying to survive." The words hit me hard. I'd never known any of this. My father had always acted like he didn't understand dreams, like ambition was foolish. But now it made sense. He wasn't mocking me because he didn't believe in success. He was mocking me because he'd once believed in it too, and lost. He looked back at me, his voice lower now. "So when you came to me talking about starting a business, all I could see was that young fool I used to be. I thought I was protecting you from making the same mistakes. But I see now, maybe I was just protecting myself from watching you succeed where I failed." For the first time, I didn't know whether to be angry or sad. The walls I'd built over the years started to crack, but I wasn't ready to let them fall. "You could have told me," I said. "You could have said all of this back then." He gave a weak smile. "You were 16. You wouldn't have listened." He wasn't wrong. I probably wouldn't have. But still, it hurt to know that the years of silence, the pain, the distance, all came from something he'd never found the courage to say. For a few moments we just sat there in silence. Outside the window the city buzzed with life. Cars, lights, people chasing their dreams just like I had. My father looked out, eyes glistening. "You know," he said softly, "I see your trucks everywhere now. The big silver ones with your name on them. Malik Global Logistics." He smiled faintly. "You did exactly what I couldn't. You built something real." I wanted to say thank you, but my throat felt tight. I didn't know how to react. There was a part of me that still wanted him to apologize properly, to say he was proud of me out loud. But another part of me, maybe the older, wiser part, knew that this was his way of saying it. Then, just as I thought the conversation was coming to an end, he said something that made my pulse race. "But that's not all I came here to tell you," he murmured. "There's something else you need to know, something about your mother." The room suddenly felt smaller. My mother had died when I was a kid. I didn't remember much about her, just flashes of laughter, the smell of her cooking, the sound of her voice singing softly when she thought no one could hear. My father never talked about her. Not once. It was like she'd disappeared, erased from our family story. And now he wanted to bring her up? "What about her?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. He swallowed hard. "She didn't die the way you think she did." I froze. My heart started pounding in my chest. "What are you talking about?" He looked away, pain etched deep into his face. "I can't say everything yet. But the truth is, there were things happening back then, things I didn't tell you because I thought it would protect you. I thought burying it would make it easier. But it didn't. It just made everything worse." I leaned forward, my voice trembling. "Dad, what do you mean? What happened to her?" He hesitated, his lips trembling like he wanted to speak but couldn't. Finally he said, "All I can tell you is this. Your mother didn't just leave this world because of sickness. There were people involved. People who didn't want her, or us, to succeed." The words felt heavy, unreal. "People? What people?" He shook his head. "You're not ready to hear it yet. But you will be soon. There are things I need to show you. I've been keeping them for years, waiting for the right time." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. My whole life I thought my mother had died from an illness. That's what he told me. That's what everyone told me. And now, suddenly he was saying there was more, something hidden, something dark. My pulse quickened, my mind racing with questions. "Why now?" I asked quietly. "Why are you telling me this after all these years?" "You're ready," he said. "Open this. It'll explain everything." I looked down at the envelope, my name written across it in his shaky handwriting. When I looked up again, he was already walking toward the door. "Dad, wait," I called. But he didn't turn around. He just paused at the doorway and said softly, "No matter what happens next, remember, I was never disappointed in you. I was disappointed in myself." And then he was gone. I sat there for a long time, staring at the envelope, my chest heavy with emotions I couldn't untangle. Anger, confusion, fear, and something else, hope. The kind of hope that maybe, after all these years, I might finally learn who my parents really were, and why my father had spent a lifetime hiding the truth. But as I reached for the envelope, my phone buzzed. A message flashed on the screen from an unknown number. "Don't open it yet. They're watching." My hand froze midair. And for the first time in years, I felt that same chill I did the night my father called me the disappointment of the century. Except this time it wasn't disappointment I felt, it was fear. My heart pounded as I stared at the message on my phone. The words felt unreal, like something out of a bad dream. "Don't open it yet. They're watching." My first thought was that someone was playing a prank. But deep down, something told me this wasn't a joke. I looked around my office. The glass walls, the polished floors, the faint reflection of the city skyline behind me. Everything looked normal, but suddenly it didn't feel safe anymore. I checked the number, but it was blocked. No name, no clue. Just that warning. For a few minutes I didn't move. I sat there, the envelope still on my desk, my phone still in my hand, trying to make sense of what was happening. My father had just dropped a truth bomb about my mother's death, then vanished, leaving behind more questions than answers. And now this? Who were they? And why would anyone be watching me? I called my assistant, Grace, and told her to hold all meetings for the day. I needed time to think. As soon as she left, I locked my office door and picked up the envelope again. It was small, light, whatever was inside didn't take up much space, but it felt heavy with meaning. My name was written in my father's shaky handwriting, the ink slightly smudged like he'd hesitated before writing it. I almost tore it open right then, but that message stopped me. "Don't open it yet." The words kept echoing in my head. I decided to take it home instead. I slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket and left the building through the underground parking garage, where I knew there were fewer security cameras. As I walked toward my car, I noticed something that made me pause. A black SUV parked a few spaces away, engine running, tinted windows. Nothing strange about that in the city, but the way it idled there, not moving, not leaving, it made my instincts buzz. I got into my car and drove off, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds. For a while it seemed like nothing was wrong. The traffic lights changed, the city hummed as usual, and I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid. But then I noticed the same SUV a few cars behind me. It wasn't close enough to be suspicious, but it never disappeared either. No matter how many turns I took, it was there. By the time I reached my apartment, my palms were slick with sweat. I parked in the underground lot, waited a minute, then went up the back elevator. Inside my penthouse, the city stretched out below like a sea of lights, but I couldn't enjoy it. I felt trapped, like someone was standing right behind me even when I was alone. I placed the envelope on the table and just stared at it, wondering if my father had known something dangerous. I thought about calling him, but his number went straight to voicemail. I tried twice. 3 times. Nothing. That uneasy feeling in my chest grew heavier. My father had said he was running out of time. What did he mean by that? And what did my mother's death have to do with all this? That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises, footsteps in the hallway, whispers from the vents. Maybe it was my imagination or maybe the warning was real. At around 3 a.m. I gave up trying to rest. I opened my laptop and started digging. I searched my father's old business, Jerome's Express, hoping to find something that connected to what he told me. But the records were minimal. The company had gone bankrupt 25 years ago. The only thing that caught my attention was the name of his former partner, Victor Ames. I didn't recognize it at first, but when I looked deeper, I found that name again, this time linked to a company that had merged with one of my biggest competitors last year. A logistics firm that had been trying to buy out my company for months. That couldn't be a coincidence. My father's old partner was now connected to the same people trying to get control of my empire. My thoughts spiraled. What if this wasn't just business rivalry? What if it was personal? What if the people who ruined my father's company all those years ago were back, and they weren't done with us yet? The next morning, I decided to visit the neighborhood where I grew up. I hadn't been there in years. The houses were smaller than I remembered, paint peeling, lawns overgrown. It felt strange walking those streets again. I found the old corner store still there, run by the same man who used to slip me candy when I was a kid. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. "Malik, you made it big, huh? Haven't seen you around in forever," he said with a smile. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Just visiting." I hesitated, then asked, "You remember my dad? Jerome?" His smile faded. "Of course. Hardworking man. Haven't seen him in a while, though. Everything okay?" I nodded slowly. "I think so. Just trying to understand some things." He gave me a strange look. "You know, your mom used to come here too. Sweet woman. Always talking about the plans she had for you." He paused. "Shame what happened." I swallowed hard. "Do you remember anything strange from back then? Around the time she passed?" He frowned, thinking. "Strange how? Anything unusual? People visiting? Arguments? Anything like that?" He hesitated, then leaned a little closer. "Actually, yeah. There was this one guy. Came by the store a few times asking questions about your dad. Drove a black SUV, fancy one. Said he worked for the city, but I never believed him. Your dad told him to stay away." A chill ran down my spine. A black SUV. I thanked him and left, my mind racing. The pieces were starting to connect, but I still couldn't see the full picture. When I got back to my car, there was a folded piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. No writing on the outside. I unfolded it slowly, my heart thudding. Inside there were just 2 words. "Stop digging." I looked around, but no one was there. The street was empty, quiet, almost too quiet. I got into the car, locked the doors, and drove off fast. Whoever was behind this knew where I lived, where I worked, and now, where I went. By the time I got home, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I grabbed the envelope from the table and tore it open. Inside was a single photograph and a folded letter. The photo was old, me as a baby in my mother's arms, and behind us, a man I didn't recognize. He wasn't smiling. He was looking directly at the camera, his hand resting on my mother's shoulder like he owned the moment. On the back of the photo, my father had written one line, "Find him before he finds you." The letter was longer, but before I could read it, my phone buzzed again. Same blocked number. This time there was no message, just a photo. My office building, taken from across the street. I froze. Whoever was watching wasn't far. I didn't know who to trust anymore. My father had vanished. Someone was tracking me. And now my mother's death didn't look like an accident. I felt like my whole world was cracking open, revealing something dark underneath. As I stood by the window looking out at the city lights, I realized something else. Every empire, no matter how strong, is built on secrets. And mine might have been built on one that was never meant to surface. Somewhere out there, the truth was waiting. And so were the people who wanted to make sure I never found it. I stood frozen by the window, the city glowing beneath me like 1,000 tiny secrets waiting to be uncovered. My phone was still in my hand, the image of my office building burning into my mind. Whoever was watching me wasn't just trying to scare me, they wanted me to know they were close. Too close. My pulse thudded in my ears as I locked all the doors and shut the blinds. For the first time in years, I felt powerless, like that 16-year-old kid again, standing in front of my father with no idea what was coming next. I sat down at my desk, the letter from the envelope still in front of me. I hesitated before opening it, my hands trembling slightly. My father's handwriting filled the page, shaky but firm. "If you're reading this," it began, "it means I couldn't tell you everything in person. There are things about your mother's death, and about me, that you've been lied to about. You have to understand, I didn't keep these secrets to hurt you. I did it to keep you alive." The words made my stomach twist. Alive? What could he possibly mean? I kept reading. "The man in the photograph, his name is Victor Ames. He wasn't just my business partner. He was your mother's half-brother." I froze. My mother had a brother? My father never mentioned anyone from her side of the family. "When our business failed, Victor blamed me," the letter continued. "But the truth is, it wasn't just bad luck. He sabotaged it. He wanted control, and when I refused to sign over my shares, he came after us. Your mother tried to protect me, and you, but she paid the price. I told the police it was an accident because I had no proof. And because he made sure I wouldn't." I dropped the letter, my hands shaking. The air around me felt heavier. The man who had ruined my father's life, who had destroyed their business and my mother's future, was her own brother? And now, years later, he was tied to the company that had been trying to buy out mine. It was like everything had come full circle. I read the last few lines of the letter. "If Victor knows who you are, he won't stop until he takes what's yours. Don't trust anyone connected to him. I left something hidden, something that proves everything. You'll find it in the one place I swore I'd never go back to." I didn't need to think long. I knew exactly where that was. The old warehouse my father used to rent when he ran Jerome's Express. The same warehouse that went up for sale years ago and had been abandoned ever since. The next morning, I drove there before the sun came up. The city was still half asleep, the streets quiet except for the sound of my tires rolling over cracked asphalt. The warehouse sat at the edge of the industrial district, gray and forgotten, surrounded by rusted fences and overgrown weeds. I parked a block away, my heart pounding. Inside, the air was cold and thick with dust. Sunlight filtered through broken windows, landing in narrow beams across the floor. Old crates and delivery boxes were stacked in corners, covered with cobwebs. It felt like stepping back in time. Every step echoed. I could almost see my father there, younger, full of hope, before everything went wrong. I walked slowly, searching. The letter hadn't said exactly what I was looking for, only that it would prove everything. I checked under old desks, behind shelves, inside drawers. Nothing. I was about to give up when I noticed a loose floorboard near the back wall. I knelt down and pried it open. Inside was a small, rusted metal box. My breath caught. I pulled it out and wiped off the dust. It was locked, but the latch was old and gave way easily with a few hard tugs. Inside were papers, photographs, and a small flash drive. The papers were business documents, contracts, partnership forms, and letters, all signed by both my father and Victor Ames. But some of them had notes scribbled in the margins. My father's handwriting again, pointing out fraudulent numbers, false signatures. Proof of manipulation. Then I found another photograph. This one made my blood run cold. It was my mother standing beside Victor, and she looked terrified. Her eyes weren't on the camera, they were on something or someone out of frame. On the back of the photo were 3 words, "He found us." Before I could process it, a faint sound echoed through the warehouse. The crunch of gravel outside. Then footsteps. I froze, listening. My car was hidden, so whoever was here didn't follow me directly, but they were coming closer. I quietly stuffed the papers and flash drive into my jacket and slipped behind one of the large crates. The footsteps grew louder, steady, unhurried. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to hide. Through a narrow gap between the crates, I saw a tall man in a dark coat walk in, scanning the space. His movements were deliberate, confident. He stopped near the center of the room and turned slowly as if he already knew I was there. "Malik," he said, his voice calm but chilling. "You look just like your mother." My heart stopped. That voice, I didn't recognize it, but something about it felt wrong. He took a step closer and the light caught his face. I'd seen that face before, in the photo from the envelope. It was him. Victor Ames. I stayed hidden, barely breathing. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said. "Your father always was predictable. He couldn't leave the past alone, and now neither can you." He looked around, smiling faintly. "Did he tell you what really happened? Or just his version?" I clenched my fists trying to stay quiet, but his words cut deep. He kept talking, pacing slowly. He blamed me for everything. Said I ruined him. But he didn't tell you how your mother got involved, did he? How she tried to take everything from both of us. He laughed softly. You see, Malik, the truth is never as clean as your father wanted you to believe. My pulse raced. He was close now, too close. I could see the faint scar running down the side of his neck, the slight limp in his walk. He wasn't guessing. He knew I was here. You've built quite an empire, he continued. $50 million. Not bad for a kid who started with nothing. But everything you have, it belongs to me. Just like your father's business should have. He stopped, tilting his head slightly, his eyes scanning the shadows. I know you're listening, Malik. Why don't you come out so we can talk like family? I stayed still, barely daring to breathe. He sighed. Fine, he said softly. But you should know, I'm not the only one looking for you. He pulled something from his pocket. A phone. He tapped the screen and a photo appeared. My father, sitting in what looked like a hospital room, pale and unconscious. My stomach dropped. He's not dead yet, Victor said. But if you want him to stay that way, you'll stop digging. I bit down hard on my lip to keep from making a sound. My mind was spinning. My father was alive, but in danger. And this man, the one who destroyed everything, had him. Victor turned toward the door, his voice echoing as he walked away. You're smart, Malik. Be smarter than your father. Walk away while you still can. The door slammed shut behind him. Silence filled the warehouse again, heavy and suffocating. For secrets my parents had been caught in, it wasn't over. Not even close. And now, for the first time, I wasn't just fighting for my company or my name. I was fighting for the truth, and for my father's life. Outside, the sun was rising over the city, turning the gray sky to gold. But it didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like a warning. The storm was coming and I was right at the center of it. As I stepped out of the warehouse, the morning air felt colder than before. The sunlight hit my face, but it didn't warm me, it just reminded me how far from safe I was. My hands still shook as I clutched the flash drive in my pocket, the papers hidden under my jacket. Every instinct told me to run, but I didn't even know where to. My father was alive, trapped somewhere, and the man who'd haunted his past had just walked right into my life. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the one in control. On the drive back to the city, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that black SUV again. My mind was racing, trying to figure out my next move. I couldn't go to the police. If what my father said was true, Victor had power, influence, and people working for him. The wrong word to the wrong person could make things worse. I needed proof. Real proof. And the only thing I had was that flash drive. When I got back to my penthouse, I closed all the blinds and turned off my phone before plugging the drive into my laptop. For a second, nothing happened. Then a single folder appeared on the screen labeled Project M. Inside were dozens of files, financial records, legal contracts, and emails. Most were encrypted, but a few were readable. I opened one and froze. It was an internal memo from a logistics board meeting dated almost a decade ago. The company name, Ames Global Freight. Victor's company. But the email mentioned another name too, Malik Transport Solutions. My name. My company. Years before it even existed. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but the more I read, the clearer it became. The memo discussed a future acquisition, describing a small-scale business model using online trade and digital marketing, a model identical to how I started my empire. It was as if someone had mapped out my entire business plan before I even created it. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the rest of the files. There were performance charts, projections, and personal data, information that could only have come from someone close to me. My breath caught when I saw the name on one of the reports. Grace. My assistant. There it was, email exchanges between her and a private investor, all leading back to Ames Global Freight. She'd been reporting on my meetings, product launches, and even personal travel schedules. My entire company, my movements, everything, I'd been watched from the inside. I felt sick. Grace had been with me for 5 years. She helped me build the brand, handled confidential deals, stood beside me through chaos. She was the one person I trusted completely. And now, I didn't even know who she really was. My laptop beeped suddenly, pulling me out of my thoughts. A video file had started playing automatically. It was old and grainy, the date stamp showing it was recorded 16 years ago. The image flickered, showing my father sitting in a dark room talking to someone off camera. His face was younger, determined, but his voice was strained. If anything happens to me, he said, don't trust anyone connected to the company, not even the ones closest to you. They'll smile in your face while they sell your name. Then just before the video cut off, a woman's voice answered, soft but clear. We'll handle it, Jerome. He'll never find out. My blood went cold. I knew that voice. It was my mother's. I sat there in silence, staring at the screen. My father had recorded that video years before everything fell apart. My mother had been part of it, whatever it was. And she wasn't as innocent as I'd been led to believe. Maybe Victor wasn't lying when he said the truth wasn't clean. Before I could process it, my intercom buzzed. My building had tight security, so it wasn't common for anyone to show up unannounced. I hesitated before pressing the button. Who is it? It's Grace, came the reply. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. We need to talk. My stomach twisted. I looked at the laptop screen again, then back at the door. I didn't want to believe she was part of this, but the evidence was there. Still, I needed answers, and she might be the only one who had them. I buzzed her up but kept the flash drive in my pocket. When she stepped into the apartment, she looked different. Not in her appearance, but in her energy. The easy confidence she usually carried was gone. Her eyes darted around the room before settling on me. You found it, didn't you? She asked quietly. I didn't answer. I just stared at her. She sighed. Malik, listen to me. I didn't want it to go this far. You weren't supposed to find out like this. Find out what? I said sharply. That your company, your empire, was never entirely yours, she said. It was part of something bigger. Victor planned it years ago. He created the foundation and waited for someone with your drive to make it happen. You were never just building your dream, you were building his. Her words hit me like a punch. That's not possible, I said. I started this from nothing. Every deal, every product, every investor came through his channels, she interrupted. You didn't know it, but he guided the path. He made sure your business took off fast, connected you with the right people, gave you the illusion of independence. It was all a setup. And she hesitated, guilt flickering in her eyes, I was supposed to make sure you stayed on that path. I took a step back, trying to process it. So what are you saying, Grace? That everything I built is fake? No, she said softly. You made it real. But now that you know, he's not going to let you keep it. My throat went dry. Where's my father? She looked down. He's alive. But they're using him to control you. If you go public with what you found, she stopped herself, shaking her head. You have to be careful. There are things you don't understand yet. Your mother, she was trying to protect you too. I stared at her, trying to read her expression, but all I saw was fear. Protect me from what? Before she could answer, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the blocked number. I opened it slowly. This time it wasn't a warning. It was a live photo, a hospital room. My father hooked to machines. And standing beside him was Victor, holding something that looked like a small remote device in his hand. The caption below made my heart drop. You have 24 hours to hand over the evidence, or you lose him. The room spun for a moment. Grace stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. He's not bluffing, Malik. You have no idea what Victor's capable of. I turned toward her, the weight of everything pressing down like a storm. Then tell me, I said, my voice breaking, what do I do now? She hesitated, her eyes flickering to the flash drive in my pocket. You have something he doesn't want exposed. That means you have power. But if you use it wrong, you'll lose everything. Your father, your company, your life. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The city lights flickered through the window, painting shadows across her face. I realized then that I didn't know who to trust anymore. Not even the people who claimed to be helping me. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about family or business anymore. It was about control. About legacy. And if Victor thought I was going to hand over everything I built, he was wrong. Because no matter what it cost me, I was going to find my father, uncover the truth about my mother, and end this once and for all. Even if it meant burning the empire I built to the ground. The following night felt endless. Every second ticked louder than the last as I sat in my office, the flash drive clutched in my hand like it held the answer to everything. My father's face kept flashing in my mind, weak, pale, trapped in that hospital bed. Victor's threat echoed in my ears. You have 24 hours. My heart wouldn't let me forget it. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I called Grace. She didn't answer at first, but when she finally did, her voice sounded tired and broken. Malik, please don't do anything reckless, she said. You're walking straight into his game. Maybe, I replied, but I'm done being a piece on his board. I knew where Victor would be, the annual logistics summit at his company headquarters. It was a massive event, broadcasted live, filled with executives, journalists, and cameras. If there was any place I could expose the truth without being silenced, it was there. Grace tried to talk me out of it, but I hung up before she could say another word. There was no turning back. I arrived at the summit early, blending into the crowd in a dark suit and hat. The air was thick with tension and false smiles. Everywhere I looked, I saw people who'd once dismissed me, men who had called my father a failure and me his echo. They had no idea that I was about to blow the entire industry wide open. When Victor took the stage, his voice boomed with confidence. "We've built the future of trade," he said, gesturing toward the massive LED screen behind him. "Partnership, innovation, and vision, that's what defines Ames Global." I watched him closely. The man was a master manipulator, smooth, charming, the kind of person people followed blindly. But tonight I was done watching from the shadows. I waited until he announced a special guest investor. That was my cue. I stepped out of the crowd and walked straight toward the stage. The security guards moved fast, but I held up a microphone from one of the nearby stands before they could stop me. "Special guest," I said, my voice echoing through the hall. "You mean the man whose company you built by stealing from others?" The room went silent. Cameras turned toward me. Victor froze, his smile fading for the first time. "Ah," he said finally, his tone calm but dangerous. "Mr. Malik? Always dramatic. To what do we owe the pleasure?" "You owe me the truth," I said, holding up the flash drive. "About my company. About my father. About everything you took from us." A murmur rippled through the audience. Victor tilted his head, feigning amusement. "Son, you're mistaken. Whatever story you've built in that head of yours. Save it," I cut in. "I have proof. Emails, contracts, recordings. You orchestrated everything. You used my father's research, his name, his dream, and then you left him to rot while you built your empire on his back." For a second his mask slipped. He looked straight at me and in his eyes I saw the truth. I wasn't wrong. Before he could speak, I pressed a button on the small remote in my pocket. The LED screen behind him flickered, then started playing the video from the flash drive, the one of my father from 16 years ago. His voice filled the room. "If anything happens to me, don't trust anyone connected to the company, not even the ones closest to you." Gasps spread through the audience. Reporters scrambled for their cameras. Victor stepped forward, trying to grab the mic. "Turn that off," he shouted, but the video kept playing, until the woman's voice spoke next. "We'll handle it, Jerome. He'll never find out." The room fell dead silent again. That voice, my mother's voice, echoed in the air. I froze. Everyone looked between me and the screen, confused. Victor smirked, regaining his composure. "You see," he said smoothly, "you've just proven my point. Your mother and I built this. Together. She wasn't the victim you thought she was. She was my partner." I felt my knees weaken. "You're lying." "Am I?" he said softly. "She came to me after your father's breakdown. She wanted security, a future for you. I gave her that. You were never just his son, Malik. You were the product of both of us, his ambition, her strategy." The words hit me like a storm. My chest felt hollow. I'd spent my entire life trying to prove my father wrong, to be more than his disappointment, and now everything I thought I knew about him, about her, was shattered. But even through the chaos in my mind, I saw what Victor was doing. He wanted to break me publicly, to twist the truth so that I'd lose control. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "You can rewrite the past all you want," I said, "but you don't control the future anymore." I turned toward the cameras, speaking directly to them. "Everything you've seen here is evidence of how power, greed, and betrayal shaped this industry. My father tried to build something honest. They destroyed him for it. But not anymore. I'm here to finish what he started." The crowd erupted, reporters shouting questions, executives whispering in panic. Victor lunged toward me, but security held him back. I walked off the stage, my heart racing. For the first time in years, I felt free. Outside, Grace was waiting near my car. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. "You did it," she said softly. "It's all over the news. He can't hide now." I nodded, exhausted but relieved. "What about my father?" She hesitated, looking down at her phone. "They found him. The authorities raided one of Victor's private facilities an hour ago. He's safe, Malik. He's alive." The weight on my chest lifted just a little. I leaned against the car, closing my eyes, letting the moment sink in. For the first time, it felt like the nightmare was finally ending. But then Grace's phone buzzed again. She looked at the screen and her face went pale. "What is it?" I asked. She slowly handed it to me. It was a message from an unknown number. Just one line. "You think Victor was the only one?" Below it was an image, another video thumbnail. It showed my father, awake in a hospital bed, speaking to someone standing beside him. The timestamp was from an hour ago. I tapped the play icon. The camera panned, revealing the person he was talking to. My breath caught in my throat. It was my mother. She was alive. And she was smiling. That was when I realized the story wasn't over. Not even close. The following night felt endless. Every second ticked louder than the last as I sat in my office, the flash drive clutched in my hand like it held the answer to everything. My father's face kept flashing in my mind, weak, pale, trapped in that hospital bed. Victor's threat echoed in my ears. "You have 24 hours. My heart wouldn't let me forget it. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I called Grace. She didn't answer at first, but when she finally did, her voice sounded tired and broken. "Malik, please don't do anything reckless," she said. "You're walking straight into his game." "Maybe," I replied, "but I'm done being a piece on his board." I knew where Victor would be, the annual logistics summit at his company headquarters. It was a massive event, broadcasted live, filled with executives, journalists, and cameras. If there was any place I could expose the truth without being silenced, it was there. Grace tried to talk me out of it, but I hung up before she could say another word. There was no turning back. I arrived at the summit early, blending into the crowd in a dark suit and hat. The air was thick with tension and false smiles. Everywhere I looked, I saw people who'd once dismissed me, men who had called my father a failure and me his echo. They had no idea that I was about to blow the entire industry wide open. When Victor took the stage, his voice boomed with confidence. "We've built the future of trade," he said, gesturing toward the massive LED screen behind him. "Partnership, innovation, and vision, that's what defines Ames Global." I watched him closely. The man was a master manipulator, smooth, charming, the kind of person people followed blindly. But tonight I was done watching from the shadows. I waited until he announced a special guest investor. That was my cue. I stepped out of the crowd and walked straight toward the stage. The security guards moved fast, but I held up a microphone from one of the nearby stands before they could stop me. "Special guest," I said, my voice echoing through the hall. "You mean the man whose company you built by stealing from others?" The room went silent. Cameras turned toward me. Victor froze, his smile fading for the first time. "Ah," he said finally, his tone calm but dangerous. "Mr. Malik? Always dramatic. To what do we owe the pleasure?" "You owe me the truth," I said, holding up the flash drive. "About my company. About my father. About everything you took from us." A murmur rippled through the audience. Victor tilted his head, feigning amusement. "Son, you're mistaken. Whatever story you've built in that head of yours. Save it," I cut in. "I have proof. Emails, contracts, recordings. You orchestrated everything. You used my father's research, his name, his dream, and then you left him to rot while you built your empire on his back." For a second his mask slipped. He looked straight at me and in his eyes I saw the truth. I wasn't wrong. Before he could speak, I pressed a button on the small remote in my pocket. The LED screen behind him flickered, then started playing the video from the flash drive, the one of my father from 16 years ago. His voice filled the room. "If anything happens to me, don't trust anyone connected to the company, not even the ones closest to you." Gasps spread through the audience. Reporters scrambled for their cameras. Victor stepped forward, trying to grab the mic. "Turn that off," he shouted, but the video kept playing, until the woman's voice spoke next. "We'll handle it, Jerome. He'll never find out." The room fell dead silent again. That voice, my mother's voice, echoed in the air. I froze. Everyone looked between me and the screen, confused. Victor smirked, regaining his composure. "You see," he said smoothly, "you've just proven my point. Your mother and I built this. Together. She wasn't the victim you thought she was. She was my partner." I felt my knees weaken. "You're lying." "Am I?" he said softly. "She came to me after your father's breakdown. She wanted security, a future for you. I gave her that. You were never just his son, Malik. You were the product of both of us, his ambition, her strategy." The words hit me like a storm. My chest felt hollow. I'd spent my entire life trying to prove my father wrong, to be more than his disappointment, and now everything I thought I knew about him, about her, was shattered. But even through the chaos in my mind, I saw what Victor was doing. He wanted to break me publicly, to twist the truth so that I'd lose control. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. You can rewrite the past all you want, I said, but you don't control the future anymore. I turned toward the cameras, speaking directly to them. Everything you've seen here is evidence of how power, greed, and betrayal shaped this industry. My father tried to build something honest. They destroyed him for it. But not anymore. I'm here to finish what he started. The crowd erupted, reporters shouting questions, executives whispering in panic. Victor lunged toward me, but security held him back. I walked off the stage, my heart racing. For the first time in years, I felt free. Outside, Grace was waiting near my car. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. You did it, she said softly. It's all over the news. He can't hide now. I nodded, exhausted but relieved. What about my father? She hesitated, looking down at her phone. They found him. The authorities raided one of Victor's private facilities an hour ago. He's safe, Malik. He's alive. The weight on my chest lifted just a little. I leaned against the car, closing my eyes, letting the moment sink in. For the first time, it felt like the nightmare was finally ending. But then Grace's phone buzzed again. She looked at the screen and her face went pale. What is it? I asked. She slowly handed it to me. It was a message from an unknown number. Just one line. You think Victor was the only one? Below it was an image, another video thumbnail. It showed my father, awake in a hospital bed, speaking to someone standing beside him. The timestamp was from an hour ago. I tapped the play icon. The camera panned, revealing the person he was talking to. My breath caught in my throat. It was my mother. She was alive. And she was smiling. That was when I realized the story wasn't over. Not even close. My hands trembled as I watched the video. There she was, my mother, alive, calm, and very real. Her hair was streaked with gray, her expression unreadable as she sat beside my father's hospital bed. My mind couldn't keep up with what my eyes were seeing. For years I believed she had died. I'd built my entire identity around that loss. And now she was right there, looking as if she hadn't been missing for a single day. My father looked weak but alert in the footage. He was talking to her, but the sound was faint. I turned the volume up. You shouldn't have come, he said. They'll find out. I had to, she replied softly. He deserves to know the truth. The screen went black. My reflection stared back at me in the phone's glass. I didn't know whether to feel relief, anger, or fear. My whole life had been a battle against ghosts, of failure, betrayal, and pain. And now one of those ghosts was alive. Grace touched my arm gently. You should go to him, she said. Whatever this is, you need answers from her. Not from files or enemies, from her. She was right. For once, I didn't think about the company, the news, or even Victor. I just needed to look my mother in the eyes and ask why she left. By the time I reached the hospital, it was dawn. The sky outside was turning pale gold, and the halls were quiet except for the soft beeping of machines. I walked into the room slowly, almost afraid she'd vanish if I moved too fast. My father was asleep, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. And sitting beside him, just as in the video, was my mother. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes filled with tears. Malik, she whispered. You look just like him. I didn't speak at first. My throat tightened. You're alive, I finally said. All these years, you let me think you were gone. She nodded slowly. I had to. Victor wouldn't have stopped until he got what he wanted. He thought I knew where your father hid his research, and when I refused to tell him, I had to disappear. It was the only way to keep you safe. I clenched my fist. Safe? You let me grow up thinking I was the reason everything fell apart. You let Dad call me a disappointment while you hid in the shadows. Her eyes welled up again. I know, she said quietly. I wanted to come back so many times, but I couldn't risk Victor finding either of you. When I heard what you'd become, the empire you built, I thought maybe you were finally free from all this. I shook my head. Free? I walked right into his trap. Everything I built was part of his plan. I was fighting a war I didn't even know existed. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Malik, she said softly. I just want you to understand that none of this, your father's pain, your success, even Victor's downfall, was for nothing. You proved that legacy isn't about blood or mistakes. It's about what you do with the truth. I stood there for a long moment, looking at her, this woman who had haunted my dreams for years. Part of me still felt angry, betrayed even. But another part, a quieter part, finally understood. All the pain, the abandonment, the endless drive to prove myself. It had forged me into someone who could survive this. My father stirred in his bed. His eyes opened slowly, and when they met mine, something shifted in them. For the first time in decades, he didn't look at me with disappointment. He looked at me with pride. "You did it," he said weakly. "You exposed him." I nodded. "He's finished, Dad. The world knows everything." He smiled faintly, his hand trembling as he reached out. I took it, feeling how fragile he'd become. "I was wrong about you," he whispered. "You were never the disappointment. You were the proof that I did something right." Those words hit me harder than I expected. All the resentment I carried for years started to crumble. I realized I wasn't chasing success to prove him wrong, I'd been chasing it to make him see me. And now, finally, he did. My mother placed her hand over ours. "You both deserve peace now," she said softly. The following weeks passed like a blur. Victor was arrested on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The files from the flash drive became public evidence, and the empire he'd built started to collapse piece by piece. Investors backed out, companies cut ties, and his reputation evaporated overnight. My company, Malik Transport Solutions, faced its own storm. The media questioned everything, how much of it had been mine and how much had been part of Victor's scheme. But I didn't run from it this time. I stood in front of cameras, owned my story, and told the truth. "Yes," I said at the press conference, "Victor had a hand in the early stages of my business. But he didn't build what I've built. He didn't earn the loyalty of my team or the trust of my customers. That's mine. That's us. And we're not done." It wasn't about clearing my name anymore, it was about reclaiming my purpose. My father's research, my mother's sacrifices, even my own mistakes, they all became part of something bigger. Something real. Grace stayed by my side through it all. When I asked her why, after everything, she didn't just walk away, she smiled and said, "Because I believed in the man you became. Not the one Victor tried to control." A few months later, I took my father home. He was still weak but recovering. My mother stayed with him, and for the first time since I was a child, we had dinner together as a family. There was laughter, even if it was quiet and hesitant. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One night, after they went to bed, I stood outside looking at the skyline. The city lights stretched far into the distance, reflecting everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. I thought about that boy who once stood in front of his father, hearing the words, "disappointment of the century." I smiled a little. Maybe I had been. But not anymore. Now I understood something deeper. That success wasn't about revenge or proving someone wrong. It was about healing what was broken and finding peace in the truth. My $50 million empire wasn't just a monument to ambition. It was a reminder that no matter where you come from, no matter how many times life tells you you're not enough, you can still rewrite your story. As I turned to go back inside, my phone buzzed. It was an email with no subject line. I opened it and there was only one sentence. "Some legacies never end." Attached was a document titled Project N. For a second I stared at it, unsure whether to laugh or worry. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was the beginning of something new. Either way, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, I was ready. Because I wasn't just the man my father called a disappointment anymore. I was the man who turned that pain into power. The one who built an empire, not from privilege, not from deceit, but from resilience, truth, and the will to rise when everything tried to pull me down. And that was my real legacy.